They all came dressed to impress the most feared man in the room, but not one of them realized that the only person he would truly notice had arrived wearing a simple black apron instead of diamonds. The ballroom inside the Grand Hanol Hotel shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers imported from Italy, their golden reflections dancing across polished marble floors that stretched farther than most people could afford to imagine. Every table overflowed with white orchids, handcrafted centerpieces, and silver place settings arranged with military precision. More than 50 distinguished guests had gathered for one purpose alone: to celebrate Ethan Park, the Korean-American businessman whose quiet influence reached far beyond luxury hotels and investment firms. Some whispered that every powerful politician in the city knew his name. Others claimed Fortune 500 executives waited weeks for a meeting with him. Nobody could agree on the truth because Ethan Park never bothered correcting rumors. He simply walked through life with the calm certainty of someone who had long stopped needing anyone's approval. As conversations filled the ballroom with polished laughter and carefully rehearsed compliments, Ethan remained seated at the head table, his charcoal suit perfectly tailored, his posture relaxed but unreadable. Every guest wanted his attention. Every executive hoped for a handshake. Every socialite searched for a smile that never came. Expensive watches flashed beneath soft lighting as glasses lifted in endless toasts. Stories were told louder whenever Ethan looked in their direction, only for disappointment to settle moments later when his expression remained unchanged. It had become almost a competition. Who could finally make the infamous Ethan Park react? Yet every joke dissolved into silence. Every compliment disappeared into the air. Every carefully planned introduction ended with the same polite nod before he shifted his eyes elsewhere. To most people in the room, his indifference felt like rejection. To Ethan, it was simply another Thursday night. Across the ballroom, unnoticed by nearly everyone, Maya Brooks adjusted the sleeve of her crisp black uniform balancing a polished serving tray against one hand. 27 years old, she had worked double shifts for nearly 3 years without ever complaining. She wasn't thinking about billion-dollar deals or influential guests. She was wondering whether her grandmother had remembered to take her evening medication and whether the city bus would still be running when her shift finally ended after midnight. She moved quietly between tables with practiced grace, replacing water glasses before anyone noticed they were empty, collecting finished plates without interrupting conversations, disappearing almost as quickly as she arrived. Invisible. That was exactly how luxury service was supposed to feel. Then something completely unexpected happened. An elderly gentleman reached for a dinner roll just as it slipped from his plate, bounced once across the white tablecloth, and landed squarely in his lap. For half a second the ballroom froze. The gentleman stared at the bread with exaggerated disbelief before lifting both hands in surrender as though the roll had somehow defeated him. Maya couldn't stop herself. A warm, genuine laugh escaped before she could hide it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't disrespectful. It carried the unmistakable sound of someone who still found joy in ordinary moments. The elderly guest laughed with her almost instantly, and within seconds they were both smiling as she handed him a fresh napkin. Most people barely noticed. Ethan Park did. His fingers paused against the crystal glass he had been holding. Slowly, almost unconsciously, he lifted his eyes toward the young waitress whose laughter lingered in the air long after every expensive speech had been forgotten. For reasons he could neither explain nor ignore, he couldn't look away. Ethan Park had spent years mastering the art of ignoring distractions because his world rewarded caution far more often than curiosity. Every successful negotiation had taught him the same lesson. The loudest voice in the room usually wanted something. The brightest smile often concealed an agenda. Even kindness, in the circles where he lived, frequently arrived with invisible conditions attached. That was why the memory of the young waitress's laughter lingered far longer than it should have. It had not sounded rehearsed. It had not asked for attention. It simply existed for a brief moment before disappearing back into the rhythm of the evening. Across the ballroom, Maya Brooks had already forgotten about the tiny incident with the dinner roll. She was carrying fresh coffee to a table near the windows while quietly reminding herself to clock out exactly on time. Every extra minute mattered because the last bus left at 12:15, and missing it meant paying for a rideshare she could not comfortably afford. Her paycheck stretched only because she treated every dollar with respect. Rent, groceries, her grandmother's prescriptions, electricity, and a small savings envelope hidden inside a kitchen drawer all depended upon careful planning. Luxury surrounded her every evening, yet none of it belonged to her. Strangely, she did not resent it. Her grandmother had always repeated the same sentence whenever life became difficult. Do not count another person's blessings before appreciating your own. Maya carried those words with her more faithfully than any expensive jewelry could ever be worn. While another server quietly complained about demanding guests, Maya offered to help carry 2 heavy trays without hesitation. When a dishwasher accidentally dropped a stack of clean plates, she crouched beside him before anyone else moved, helping gather every unbroken piece while reassuring him that mistakes happen to everyone. Later, she noticed a florist struggling to straighten an arrangement that had shifted during dinner service. Without being asked, Maya steadied the vase while the woman adjusted the flowers. None of those moments lasted longer than a minute. None attracted applause. Yet together they painted a picture that nobody intended to create. Except one person happened to notice. Ethan had not realized he was watching until his longtime advisor quietly leaned toward him. "Everything all right?" the older man asked. Ethan glanced toward the stage where another executive had begun an elaborate congratulatory speech. "Yes," he answered calmly, although his attention drifted once more toward the dining room instead of the microphone. Maya crossed the ballroom carrying a tray of sparkling water with the effortless balance that came only after thousands of hours of practice. She smiled politely at every guest without lingering long enough to invite unnecessary conversation. There was no performance in her expression. She treated the billionaire at one table and the maintenance supervisor near the back entrance with exactly the same quiet respect. Ethan found that strangely unfamiliar. Most people adjusted themselves depending on who was watching. Maya seemed completely unaware that anyone important might be paying attention at all. As another round of applause echoed through the ballroom, Ethan realized he could not remember a single word from the speech that had just ended. Instead, he found himself wondering what kind of life allowed someone to protect such an unforced smile in a city that rarely rewarded innocence. It was not attraction that unsettled him. It was recognition. Somewhere beneath years of discipline and responsibility, he remembered a version of himself who had once laughed that freely before success had slowly taught him to measure every expression. The celebration ended close to midnight, but the image that followed Ethan Park home had nothing to do with million-dollar contracts or congratulatory speeches. It was the quiet smile of a waitress who had treated strangers with the same effortless kindness, whether they wore designer suits or kitchen uniforms. The following Monday, Ethan arrived at Park Hospitality headquarters before 7 in the morning as he always did. His schedule was planned down to the minute. Meetings with architects, financial reports, a charity foundation review, lunch with international investors. His executive assistant placed a neatly organized folder on his desk, followed by another stack requiring signatures before noon. Normally, Ethan completed everything without distraction. Today was different. While reviewing plans for a new luxury resort, his thoughts unexpectedly wandered back to the ballroom. He closed the folder without realizing he had read the same paragraph 3 times. Across the city, Maya Brooks tied her apron before another shift at the Grand Hanol Hotel. Monday evenings were quieter than weekends, allowing the staff to breathe between guests. She greeted the security guard by name, wished the pastry chef a happy birthday after overhearing another employee mention it earlier that morning, and thanked the maintenance technician who had repaired a loose kitchen door over the weekend. None of those conversations lasted more than a few seconds, but each person walked away smiling. Maya had an unusual habit of remembering small details about people because she believed everyone deserved to feel noticed at least once during the day. She never imagined someone else had begun noticing her. Late that afternoon, Ethan unexpectedly decided to inspect one of his flagship hotels in person instead of requesting another management report. His executives assumed he wanted to evaluate customer service before the upcoming hospitality awards. Nobody questioned his decision. When the black sedan stopped beneath the covered entrance, hotel managers hurried outside with polished smiles and carefully rehearsed greetings. Ethan acknowledged them politely before stepping through the marble lobby. Fresh lilies scented the air. A pianist played soft jazz near the grand staircase. Guests moved comfortably through the elegant space without recognizing the man who quietly owned the building around them. Ethan listened as department heads proudly described occupancy rates and customer satisfaction scores, but his attention drifted whenever familiar laughter echoed somewhere nearby. Then he saw her again. Maya was kneeling beside a little boy whose shoelace had come undone near the lobby fountain. His mother looked embarrassed, juggling shopping bags while trying to comfort her restless son. Without hesitation, Maya smiled at the child and asked permission before tying the lace into a careful double knot. When she finished, she tapped the tip of his sneaker with one finger and whispered, "Now those shoes are ready for adventure." The boy grinned as though she had handed him the greatest gift in the world. His mother thanked her repeatedly, but Maya simply wished them a wonderful evening before returning to work as though nothing remarkable had happened. Ethan remained completely silent. There had been no photographers, no supervisors watching, no opportunity for recognition. She had acted because kindness came naturally, not because anyone important happened to be nearby. For the second time in less than a week, Ethan realized the busiest person in the room had somehow become the calmest. And for reasons he still could not explain, that quiet discovery felt more valuable than every carefully prepared presentation waiting inside his office. By the end of the week, Ethan Park stopped pretending his repeated visits to the Grand Hanol Hotel were routine inspections. His executives still believed he was personally reviewing operations before announcing a nationwide expansion, and none of them questioned why he chose to arrive without warning 3 afternoons in a row. Ethan allowed them to believe whatever explanation made the most sense because the truth sounded unreasonable even to him. He was not searching for mistakes. He was searching for moments. The hotel continued moving with its usual elegance. Guests checked in beneath sparkling chandeliers. Soft piano melodies drifted through the lobby. Fresh coffee filled the air every morning while polished elevators carried travelers towards suites overlooking the city skyline. Somewhere within that quiet rhythm, Maya Brooks moved almost invisibly from one task to another. She welcomed elderly couples with the same warmth she offered young families. She thanked every dishwasher before collecting clean serving trays. She smiled at exhausted business travelers without forcing unnecessary conversation. Ethan began noticing a pattern that no performance review could ever measure. Whenever Maya entered a room, people seemed to breathe a little easier. One rainy afternoon, a housekeeping cart accidentally tipped over near the west corridor, sending neatly folded towels across the polished floor. Before the embarrassed employee could apologize, Maya knelt beside her, gathering towels while joking that gravity apparently enjoyed creating extra work on Mondays regardless of what day. It actually was. The older housekeeper laughed so hard that tears gathered in her eyes. Ethan happened to witness the entire exchange from the opposite end of the hallway while discussing renovation plans with the hotel manager. Maya never realized he had been there. Later that evening, Ethan paused outside the employee cafeteria after noticing Maya carrying 2 dinner trays instead of 1. Curious, he remained where nobody could easily see him. She placed the second tray beside an elderly dishwasher sitting alone near the window. The man looked surprised. "You forgot your break again," Maya said with a gentle smile. "If you keep feeding everyone except yourself, somebody has to return the favor." The dishwasher chuckled before thanking her. They shared a simple meal, speaking about baseball scores, grandchildren, and the unusually warm weather. There was nothing dramatic about the conversation. No life-changing confession.
No Hidden Agenda.
Only ordinary kindness exchanged between 2 people who respected one another. Ethan quietly stepped away before either of them noticed him. That evening, back inside his office, he asked his chief administrative officer for a standard employee file. "Maya Brooks," he said calmly. The request surprised the executive because Ethan almost never asked about hourly staff members personally. Within 30 minutes, a slim folder rested on his desk. He opened it expecting to discover some extraordinary explanation for the woman who occupied his thoughts with such persistent simplicity. Instead, the pages described an entirely ordinary life. 27 years old. Hospitality certification earned through night classes. Consistently excellent attendance. No disciplinary reports. No special recommendations beyond comments describing reliability, professionalism, and exceptional customer service. She cared for her elderly grandmother at home. She volunteered twice each month at a neighborhood food pantry.
No social media fame.
No remarkable family connections. No hidden accomplishments waiting to be uncovered. Ethan closed the folder slowly. For the first time in many years, the absence of extraordinary details fascinated him more than any impressive resume ever had. Maya Brooks was not trying to become unforgettable. She was simply choosing, day after day, to make other people's lives a little lighter. Somehow, that quiet consistency was beginning to change something inside a man who had spent most of his adult life believing that influence came only through power instead of compassion. The annual Horizon Leadership Gala returned to the Grand Hanol Hotel the following Friday, transforming the already elegant ballroom into the most exclusive event of the season. Governors, technology founders, professional athletes, philanthropists, and international investors filled the room with polished conversation and confident smiles. Every detail reflected perfection, from the towering floral arrangements to the string quartet performing beside floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. Maya Brooks moved calmly through the crowd, balancing silver trays with practiced confidence while quietly encouraging two newer servers who were clearly overwhelmed by the size of the event. "Just breathe," she whispered with an encouraging smile. "People remember how you make them feel more than how quickly you refill a glass." The younger employees nodded gratefully before returning to work with renewed confidence. Across the ballroom, Ethan Park entered through a private entrance with several executives, but unlike previous events, his attention drifted naturally across the room instead of toward the stage. He noticed Maya almost immediately, not because she stood out but because she never tried to. She blended into the evening with effortless professionalism, anticipating needs before guests voiced them and treating every person with equal courtesy. As Ethan accepted greetings from business leaders, an influential investor named Richard Halston raised his glass while laughing loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Richard had built a reputation for speaking without considering the effect of his words, believing confidence excused poor manners. When Maya approached to refresh the water glasses at his table, Richard glanced briefly at her name tag before smiling at the guests around him.
"These
hotels hire the friendliest faces these days," he said with a dismissive chuckle. "A good smile makes people forget they're being served by someone they will never remember tomorrow." A few uncomfortable laughs followed from guests uncertain whether they should respond. Maya paused only long enough to finish pouring the water before meeting Richard's eyes with calm professionalism. "I hope your evening continues to be wonderful, sir," she said gently before preparing to move to the next table. Richard leaned back in his chair with another amused grin. "You certainly know your place. That is becoming a rare quality." Silence spread farther than he expected. Several guests lowered their eyes toward their plates. One woman quietly set down her fork, clearly embarrassed by the comment. Maya felt the familiar sting of being underestimated, but years of caring for her grandmother had taught her that another person's lack of kindness did not have to become her own burden. She simply offered a respectful nod and continued serving the surrounding tables exactly as she had before, never allowing frustration to reach her expression. At the opposite side of the ballroom, Ethan had witnessed every word. He did not react immediately. Instead, he watched Maya continue helping an elderly couple choose dessert, smiling just as warmly as she had moments earlier. There was no resentment in her voice, no attempt to embarrass the guest in return, only quiet dignity that refused to disappear even when it would have been easier to surrender it. Ethan slowly placed his untouched glass onto the table. Around him, his executives sensed a subtle change in the atmosphere. They had worked beside him for years and recognized the almost invisible signs. His shoulders straightened slightly. His eyes became completely focused. Conversations near his table gradually faded as people noticed him rising from his chair for the first time that evening. No one knew exactly what he intended to say, but everyone could feel that the direction of the night had quietly begun to change. The sound of Ethan Park's chair sliding back across the polished floor was almost impossible to hear above the music. Yet, somehow the entire ballroom seemed to notice at once. Conversation slowed. Glasses remained suspended halfway to waiting hands. Even the string quartet continued playing more softly, as though the room itself had become aware that something important was about to happen. Ethan walked with calm, measured steps across the ballroom, not hurried, not dramatic, simply purposeful. His executives exchanged puzzled glances before quietly following several feet behind. Richard Halston looked up with an easy smile, assuming the influential businessman had come to greet him personally. "Ethan," Richard said warmly as he stood to offer a handshake. "I was hoping we would finally have a chance to discuss our investment proposal." Ethan acknowledged the greeting with a polite nod but did not reach for the offered hand. Instead, his attention shifted toward Maya, who was placing fresh bread on a nearby table while trying not to draw attention to herself. Then Ethan looked back at Richard. His voice remained calm, almost gentle, forcing everyone nearby to lean closer to hear every word. "Mr. Halston, may I ask you a simple question?" Richard smiled confidently. "Of course." Ethan glanced around the room before speaking again. "When you entered this hotel tonight, who opened the front door for you?" Richard hesitated. I do not remember." Ethan nodded slightly. "Who prepared your table before you arrived?" Richard remained silent. "Who folded your napkin, polished your glass, prepared your meal, and made certain every detail of your evening happened without interruption?" Richard shifted uncomfortably. "I suppose the staff." Ethan's expression never changed. "Exactly. The people we remember the least often carry the greatest responsibility." A quiet stillness settled across the ballroom. Nobody interrupted. Nobody reached for another drink. Ethan continued in the same composed tone. "Success should never make us forget gratitude. Every guest in this room receives excellent service because people like Miss Brooks choose every day to perform their work with dignity and care. Respect is not determined by a job title. It is demonstrated by how we treat those whose names we may never learn." Richard lowered his eyes, the confidence that had filled his voice only moments earlier quietly disappearing. Maya stood completely still, uncertain whether she should remain or excuse herself. She had never expected anyone, especially Ethan Park, to speak on her behalf. Ethan turned toward her for the first time that evening. "Miss Brooks." She looked up, surprised that he knew her name. "Yes, sir? Would you do me a favor?" She nodded carefully. "Please take your scheduled break now." Maya blinked in confusion. "Sir, I still have several tables waiting." Ethan offered the faintest smile. "They can wait 5 minutes." He turned toward the banquet manager. "Please ensure another server covers Miss Brooks's section." The manager immediately nodded. Ethan then looked back at Maya. "There is an empty seat at my table. I would appreciate your company for a few minutes while you enjoy your dinner." A quiet wave of astonishment moved through the ballroom. Executives exchanged bewildered glances. Hotel employees froze where they stood. Richard remained speechless, staring at the floor as though replaying every careless word he had spoken. Maya instinctively looked behind her, wondering if Ethan could possibly be speaking to someone else. When she realized he was waiting patiently for her answer, her voice came almost as a whisper. "Sir, are you certain?" Ethan nodded once. "Very certain." For the first time that evening, it was not influence, wealth, or status that commanded the attention of every person in the ballroom. It was a simple invitation, offered with genuine respect, that reminded everyone present how quietly true dignity could transform an entire room. For several long seconds, Maya Brooks remained exactly where she stood, her hands resting lightly against the edge of the serving tray, as though moving too quickly might somehow break the impossible moment unfolding before her. Around the ballroom, every pair of eyes followed her. Fellow servers watched with quiet disbelief. Executives whispered to one another before falling silent again. Even the banquet manager gave her a reassuring nod, silently reminding her that this invitation had truly come from the owner himself. Maya slowly placed her tray onto a nearby service station, smoothed the front of her black apron almost out of habit, and walked toward Ethan Park's table with measured steps. She had spent years making certain she never attracted attention inside elegant rooms like this one. Now she felt every chandelier, every polished glass, and every quiet conversation resting upon her shoulders. Ethan rose as she approached and gently pulled back the empty chair beside him before taking his own seat again. It was a small gesture, one many guests might not have even noticed, yet for the hotel employees standing near the entrance, it carried more meaning than any speech delivered that evening. Maya sat carefully, still unsure where to place her hands. A server immediately arrived with a fresh dinner plate, but Ethan quietly shook his head. "Bring the same meal the staff is having tonight," he said. The young server blinked in surprise before nodding. "Right away, sir." Maya looked at him with genuine confusion. "You do not have to do that. The guest menu is already prepared." Ethan smiled faintly. "I am not interested in the menu tonight. I would rather know what the staff enjoys after taking care of everyone else." A soft laugh escaped Maya before she could stop herself. "Honestly, tonight it is baked chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and peach cobbler if the kitchen did not run out already." "That sounds excellent," Ethan replied. The sincerity in his voice surprised her even more than the invitation itself. For the first time since sitting down, Maya relaxed enough to breathe normally. "My grandmother would approve," she admitted with a smile. "She says simple meals shared with grateful people always taste better." Ethan leaned back slightly. "She sounds wise." Maya nodded. "She raised me after my parents passed away. She taught me that if life gives you enough for today, you should spend more time saying thank you than asking why." Ethan lowered his eyes for a quiet moment, turning those words over in his mind. "That is not advice people hear often anymore." Maya smiled gently. "She repeats it almost every morning, so eventually, it becomes difficult to forget." Their meals arrived a few minutes later exactly as promised. No expensive garnishes.
No elaborate presentation.
Just warm food prepared for employees finishing a long shift. Ethan tasted the mashed potatoes and nodded with genuine approval. "These are surprisingly good." Maya laughed again, this time without hesitation. "I have been telling guests that for 2 years. Most of them never believe me." The conversation drifted naturally from favorite family recipes to childhood memories, community baseball games, neighborhood bakeries, and the comfort of homemade soup during cold winters. Nobody discussed business. Nobody mentioned wealth or influence. Around them, the ballroom gradually returned to quiet conversation, yet many guests continued stealing occasional glances toward the unlikely pair. What they witnessed was not a billionaire entertaining an employee. They were watching two strangers discover that genuine conversation required neither status nor ceremony. Ethan realized he had not checked his watch once since Maya sat down. Meetings usually filled his thoughts before the current one had even ended. Tonight, time seemed strangely unimportant. Across the table, Maya noticed something equally unexpected. The serious man whose reputation intimidated boardrooms across the country smiled more often than she had ever imagined possible, and every smile looked less practiced than the one before. The ballroom gradually found its rhythm again, but something had changed beneath the polished conversations and elegant music. Guests who had arrived expecting another predictable evening of speeches and networking now found themselves watching a far quieter story unfold. Ethan Park no longer seemed interested in discussing quarterly projections or upcoming acquisitions. Instead, he listened with genuine attention as Maya Brooks spoke about ordinary moments that somehow carried extraordinary meaning. "My grandmother never measured success by money," Maya said softly as she folded her napkin across her lap. "She measured it by whether people felt lighter after spending time with you." Ethan looked at her thoughtfully. "Did you always believe that?" Maya smiled before answering. "Not when I was younger. After my parents passed away, I thought life had become unfair. I kept asking why everything happened the way it did. One afternoon, my grandmother sat beside me on our apartment steps with 2 glasses of lemonade. She told me something I have never forgotten." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "What did she say?" Maya's eyes drifted toward the city lights beyond the ballroom windows. She said pain can make your heart smaller or larger. Every morning you choose which one it will be. Nobody else makes that decision for you. For several seconds, Ethan said nothing. The gentle music from the string quartet seemed farther away than before. Around him, conversations blurred into distant background noise as those simple words settled deeper than he expected. Finally, he spoke in a voice quieter than Maya had heard all evening. I cannot remember the last time anyone spoke to me without wanting something. Maya looked at him with quiet surprise. Not even your friends? Ethan gave a faint smile that carried more honesty than humor. Success changes the way people approach you. Sometimes they admire your position. Sometimes they need your influence. Sometimes they simply hope standing close to you will change their own lives. After enough years, it becomes difficult to know who sees the person instead of the reputation. Maya nodded slowly, understanding more than he realized. That sounds lonely. Ethan did not answer immediately because the truth required no explanation. After a long silence, he finally admitted, "It is." Maya rested her hands around her glass of iced tea before speaking again. My grandmother would probably tell you that lonely people do not always need bigger houses or busier schedules. Sometimes they only need one honest conversation. Ethan let out a quiet laugh, genuine and unguarded. She seems to have advice for everything. She usually does. Maya replied with another warm smile. Whenever I come home tired after work, she reminds me that nobody can steal your kindness unless you hand it to them yourself. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment, reflecting on the countless years he had spent protecting his business, his reputation, and the people who depended on him, while quietly neglecting the parts of himself that had once laughed without calculation. He realized that the sound which had first captured his attention several days earlier had not been remarkable because it was cheerful. It had been remarkable because it was free. Free from expectation. Free from performance. Free from fear of judgment. Looking across the table, he understood that Maya Brooks had never tried to change him. She had simply remained true to herself in a world that constantly encouraged people to become someone else. And somewhere between a simple meal, an ordinary conversation, and the wisdom of an elderly grandmother he had never met, Ethan felt a part of himself quietly returning that he had believed success had required him to leave behind years ago. When the gala finally came to an end, guests walked through the marble lobby carrying far more than gift bags and business cards. They carried a story they had not expected to witness. Some spoke quietly about Ethan Park's speech. Others admitted they had never seen someone of his influence interrupt an elegant evening simply to defend the dignity of an employee. Yet those who had watched most closely understood that the evening had never truly been about correcting one careless remark. It had been about reminding an entire room that character reveals itself most clearly in the smallest moments. Maya Brooks quietly returned to the staff area after thanking Ethan for dinner. She changed out of her uniform, folded her apron with the same care she always had, and collected her worn canvas bag from the employee locker room. Several coworkers greeted her with wide smiles, but she simply laughed and insisted she had only shared a meal with someone who had asked thoughtful questions. She did not describe the evening as extraordinary because she had never believed kindness needed to become a headline. Outside, cool night air drifted through the streets as she boarded the last city bus home. Across town, Ethan remained alone inside the now quiet ballroom long after the final guests had departed. Hotel employees carefully removed floral arrangements while technicians packed away microphones and lighting equipment. The same room that had echoed with polished speeches only hours earlier now rested in peaceful silence. Ethan looked across the empty tables and realized he remembered almost none of the business conversations from the evening. What remained in his mind instead was the laughter of a waitress, the wisdom of an elderly grandmother he had never met, and the realization that influence meant very little if it could not be used to protect another person's dignity. The following Monday morning, a meeting of senior executives began as scheduled inside Park Hospitality headquarters. Department leaders expected another discussion about expansion projects and financial forecasts. Instead, Ethan introduced a new initiative. Every employee, regardless of position, would receive expanded professional development opportunities, additional education assistance, and a mentorship program connecting executive leaders with hourly staff members. He explained the decision in only one sentence. The strongest company is built by people who know they are respected. No one argued. Weeks later, Maya was invited to participate in the company's first hospitality leadership program, not as a reward for one memorable evening, but because her years of quiet service had demonstrated the very qualities the organization wanted future leaders to carry forward. She accepted with humility, promising her grandmother she would continue treating every person exactly as she always had. Nothing about her smile changed. Nothing about her kindness became rehearsed. One afternoon, months later, Ethan happened to pass through the hotel lobby again. Maya was speaking with a new employee who looked nervous during her first shift. Ethan watched from a distance as Maya offered the same reassuring words she had once given another overwhelmed coworker. "Just breathe," she said with an encouraging smile. "People remember how you make them feel." Ethan smiled to himself before continuing toward the exit without interrupting. He no longer needed to observe from a distance because he already understood what had first captured his attention that evening beneath the crystal chandeliers. It had never been laughter alone. It had been the quiet strength of someone who chose compassion over bitterness, gratitude over pride, and dignity over recognition. Long after expensive decorations had been packed away and influential guests had forgotten the menu they enjoyed that night, one simple truth remained. Respect is never measured by the chair where someone sits. It is measured by the kindness they choose to offer when no reward is waiting. And on that unforgettable evening, an entire ballroom remembered what dignity truly looks like.